It's been a minute since I last did an episode of Game vs. Real here on the channel, and for those who have no idea what that is, it's super simple. It's where we pit an in-game vehicle, car, bike, whatever, against a real-life counterpart that I've featured in either Beards and Cars or Beards and Bikes here on the channel. Now, we've discussed a few in Gran Turismo 7, the Maserati Gran Turismo, the Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and probably the best representation of a car that I've featured in Gran Turismo 7 so far was the BMW M2 competition. They did a very good job with that one. This time, we're turning our attention to Japan for another very popular car, the NISSAN 370Z. They're very well loved here in the UK, especially on the used market. You get a lot of car for the money, so it's natural that they would be popular. And much like the outgoing 350Z, you would assume that it's a good drift platform to work with. Now, I'm going to go ahead and semi-spoil this video because it's going to be potentially a controversial one, especially for those who love, drive, own 370Zs in real life. Not that I dislike the car, but that it certainly wasn't what I was expecting, and at least as far as Gran Turismo 7 goes, that this might be one of the not-so-good representations. Now, with the 370Z, I was expecting a couple of things when I drove the real-life version that it kind of didn't offer. One is I thought it would have a lot more character and a lot more personality. And of course, even though it's not a full-on track day, that I was driving it on, so you're never going to get 100% of the experience, let's be honest and say that there are plenty of cars that you can enjoy without pushing them to their absolute limit and still get a really good idea of their personality and character. The 370Z felt like one of those cars that you kind of do have to push to its limits to get the best out of it. Might sound like an obvious thing to say, but trust me, not all cars are like that. Secondly, I expected it to be more tail-happy than it actually was. In fact, the centre of mass, you might say, feels decidedly more toward the front in the 370 to me. But not in terms of the obvious weight distribution, I mean in terms of the way it steers. It feels like a car that leads with its front end, which is not what I expected at all. It feels like not only is all the weight at the front, but it feels like everything is at the front. So it doesn't really tail slide, it's not really loose at all over the back end. It almost feels kind of like a four-wheel drive car. And that, in a weird way, is one of the things that they did quite well in the interpretation of the car in Gran Turismo 7, because this is the first occasion where I've had to change the tyres on the car, because it came with, I believe it was sports hards, and they were just way too good. Far too good for the car. It felt like an Evo. It felt like a four-wheel drive machine, totally neutral steering, no tail slide at all, and that's ridiculous. But then I put it on comfort softs, and although it was an improvement, it still, to be honest, feels too good. And I just don't really hear people talking about the 370Z as being that kind of car. Sure, it's quick, and sure, it could be a great track day toy, but that's not predominantly what I hear the chatter about Zs being about. I hear more about the drift aspect, more about the fun factor of the car than its performance. Now, that could be just something that I've missed, and I'm sure, like any machine, if you tune it correctly, it can be a weapon on the track. But it's just not what the stock version of the car is primarily known for. In the game, it just feels way too good, and I think it's just one of those occasions where it's polyphony coming through with boosting Japanese cars and making them feel better than they should, because it definitely does. If you just do a quick comparison, in fact, between this and the other cars that I already spoke about, even something as phenomenal through corners as the BMW M2, this 370Z feels more neutral than that does, and that's just ridiculous. In real life, as somebody who, no, has not owned a Z, but I have owned an Evo, I can tell you the Z is nothing compared to an Evo through corners. In the game, it feels about on par, even with no tuning at all, which is kind of ridiculous. I think even fans of it would have to admit that. This is a weird one for me, though, in terms of scoring it or grading it compared to real life, because with those combination of two things, in terms of, yes, it does feel more neutral and more grippy than I expected, both in the game and in real life, so that seems like a good start. And yes, also, the car had less personality and less character in real life, which lends itself into feeling more neutral, more Evo-esque, in a funny kind of way. But at the same time, I don't feel comfortable in saying that the game did a great job with this one. And I'm sure that there are owners who are going to disagree. And that's actually one of the things that I want to put out there for this particular episode, because this one is a lot more difficult for me to pass through what I actually feel. I feel like it's almost there. I feel like they've kind of done a good job, but also kind of not. Something's missing with how this car feels. It feels predominantly just way too good, period. But even beyond that, the personality and what character it does have doesn't quite feel like it's well translated to me. It almost feels just like a generic good car. Like there's no real specific Z about this car in the game, at least stock, and at least for me. So this is definitely an occasion in Game vs. Real where I would love to hear you weigh in. If you've owned a Z, a 370 of course in particular, if you've track dayed one, if you maybe do still track day one, maybe if you've raced one or built one or tuned one, what do you think? Do you think that it is a good representation of the car? In other episodes, people have disagreed and brought up good points. So of course, this is very much so down to personal experience and interpretation. But I really would be curious to know what others feel about this comparison between real life and the game version of the Z. Because to me, it's like they, as I said, are almost there, but something isn't quite right. It's just a little bit off. And much like a piece of machinery, if you set one little thing out of whack, it can send a load of other things off course as well. And it feels like that's kind of happened here. It feels like in that slight pursuit of making a Japanese car feel maybe just a little bit too good, which is nothing new for Polyphony, they've been doing that for a long time in Gran Turismo, it feels like they've kind of done that, but then maybe turned it up to 11 a bit too much, which has thrown everything else off about its personality. Because this thing, it feels like it doesn't even want to drift, and that's odd for a Z platform car. In real life, of course, it wasn't as tail happy as I thought it would be, but I also wasn't driving it quite as quick as I am on the lap here. So, like I said, weigh in with your thoughts. That's it for mine. It may be a bit of a less satisfying episode of Game vs. Real because I'm not entirely sure where I stand on this car. But ultimately, that is it for what are my thoughts on the 370Z in the game versus the real-life counterpart. And if nothing else, maybe drive it in the game, and then if you get a chance in real life to test drive one or try one out, see what you think about how they've interpreted the car. But overall, that's it for this installment, and if you would like to watch an episode with perhaps a more definitive classification of how well or not so well they did, definitely check out the other episodes, because the other ones have been a lot more cut and dried than this. But ultimately, that's it for my thoughts. I'll see you next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.